So, welcome everybody to our workshop on active learning. I'm Addie Tolliver. I'm the Associate Director for the Center for Teaching Excellence, and I'm really excited to have you guys here. This is one of those workshops in the series of like things about teaching that we should be talking all the time, tried and true, kind of basic pedagogical stuff that we've been trying to do. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about active learning, and you should definitely strive to try to implement some of these techniques that we're going to be showcasing. But in addition to the techniques that we're going to be showcasing today, I mean, you can find more of those techniques online, and we'll be happy to consult with you too if you don't know how to get started, how we can sit down and figure out what is best for your discipline. So the session objectives are here. So by the end of today's workshop, the goal is that you're able to identify the benefits of implementing active learning into your teaching practices, and you'll be able to select a skill or concept that you could teach using an active learning technique. So that's one of the things that we're going to be doing as part of actually hands-on activity. So what is active learning, right? So this is a little definition. And it's a method, as active learning methods ask students to engage in their learning by thinking, discussing, investigating, and creating. So it's using the class time for the students to really engage with the content and connect their brains to the content and actively kind of implement some of these techniques or topics that you're talking about in your lecture to make more sense of them. The good thing is that it allows, because these are in-class exercises, allows the instructors to provide timely feedback, which is something that is very important. Now, if you have a mobile device, could you please scan this code? And for the folks online, let me know if you're not able to scan the code. Let's see. I do have a call. Yes, I will share the slides. Ian. It's on the chat. Yeah, go ahead and take it out. So the results are actually showing here in the classroom, but I just, want to just get a pulse of where you stand on how often do you lecture. In one class period. How often do you lecture? Like if you think about
me talking in front of the
correct, you in front of the class, you are the distributor of the communicator of the content. So we have about, some folks do 50% of the time is lecturing. So the other time, or 75%, 75% of the audience responded that they lecture for 50% of the class, and 25% of the audience said that they lecture for 100%. So actually, I'm surprised to see the 50%. Yeah, so a lot of the times, like most faculty tend to lecture more. That is not an unusual thing, even when I do my class observations. A good practice is to vary the style of delivery and kind of mix some things, which, implementing some of these active learning strategies that we're going to be talking about today kind of help out with that. But it's good to see that, some folks are just lecturing for 50% of the time. And so the other time could be used for discussions or just other activities or like active learning. So
yeah, I put 50% there because to me, that's the time I feel that I'm speaking. I'm not necessarily lecturing the whole time, but I'm communicating with students, asking them things, explaining
so
things.
that would be lecturing.
That is lecturing.
It would still be lecturing. So
Okay.
it's still considered that as lecturing, right? Like you can still, I think asking questions to the students, if it is just one, like if you're, asking like, what do you think about this? How about this scenario? Like I would still consider that as part of the lecture. unless you're very deliberate. Like if you really kind of pause your lecture and you include an activity that is very deliberate, that will include like, like a 5-minute activity where the students are going to be, doing a think, pair, share, or they're going to be doing like a more extensive poll, not just one question, or just doing any other activity or a group activity or something, I would say that you would be lecturing. But, okay, so here's like a little definition comparing a traditional lecture versus active learning, just with using some of the quotes that I've seen. So college is a place where professors' lecture notes go straight to the students' lecture notes without passing through the brains of either. So that's kind of funny that I've seen this Mark Twain quote one time in a presentation about a traditional lecture. But basically, when students are sitting on a lecture, they tend to be paying attention to what is being said and just taking notes. And very seldom would give them intentional time to kind of process the information they're receiving. We want them to process the information, but often that happens when they're going in by themselves and processing that information themselves with notes and everything. Now, whenever we include these active learning strategies, so we involve the students in doing the things and thinking about the things that they're doing. So that is the difference, right? Like we are intentionally carving time in class for them to be able to think about all these things that you're talking about. And then they're really engaging their brains and you can provide feedback on the experience. Now, I'm not saying that the lecture is not effective. The lecture is effective, right? It's when you are transmitting information, it is great to transmit information. There are excellent lecturers. There's people that have excellent technique to do that. But depending on what you are teaching, lectures are not as effective. So if you are trying to teach values associated with subject matter, inspire interest, personal social adjustment, teaching behavioral skills, sometimes they are not the best technique for these things. So it is something that we need to consider. It's just that pairing the correct technique for what you are teaching at the moment, right? So lectures are great depending on what you're teaching, but depending on what you're teaching, you should change things up. So this is an interesting graph that has popped up in a couple of studies, is they have done studies of what happens to students' heart rates depending on how long they've been sitting on an uninterrupted lecture. So you see here at the bottom that the longer they stay, the lower the heart rate for the students. So biologically speaking, we go in a state of rest if we sit for too long and we're not doing things to kind of engage us and get us excited, which is not optimal for learning, right? Like we want to be in a state of alertness to promote better learning, for biologically our bodies to be ready to learn best. So breaking down lectures and getting activities where the students have an ability to kind of engage with their biology and kind of change things up is good, right? We don't want them sleeping. We also don't want them to feel like they're being threatened, right? So that is not optimal biological state for learning, but also we don't want them to go into a rest state. So there are benefits for active learning for both students and for instructors. So we know that for students, it improves their engagement, comprehension, and class experience. But for instructors also, it gives you the ability to assess how students are learning in class. So it's a great tool for like formative assessment and for you to gauge if the students are getting the information that you are teaching them in real time. So I highly recommend that you kind of try to play around with these. So there's other benefits, right? So they can process the concepts, terms, and skills that they're learning in class. They can apply that knowledge. They can connect the concepts, but also connect with other students in class as they're learning the concepts. And it promotes interaction from everybody, and they can receive feedback. There's a lot of supporting evidence for active learning strategies. And in fact, this Well, it's kind of hidden here, the reference, but this 2011 study um, did like a study and evaluated 166 studies that reported effect size compared to effects of innovation, particularly related to active learning. And and they saw that it really improves student outcomes. So this was like a meta-analysis looking at 166 studies, and all the ones that used active learning strategies had better student outcomes. And there are other studies out there that also support that. Now, whenever you're trying to include active learning strategies, one of the things that we recommend is that you either have like a syllabus statement or you have communications with your students talking about active learning and what it is, right? Some students that gotten accustomed to just traditional lectures might not understand what active learning is. I think that every time that you communicate that there are benefits for their learning, they would understand and appreciate that. So um, you can explicitly spend time in class and kind of talk to them about the benefits. And it is more effort on the part of the students. So sometimes they might not like it as much because you cannot just not engage, right? It's like if you create some of these activities, the point is that they will be engaging, they're going to be using, so they're not going to be able to just have their laptops and be shopping on Amazon at that time. Particularly if you use the classroom and you're walking around and seeing what they're doing as they're doing these active learning strategies. So they might not like it as much, but there are benefits for them if they're learning. So if you communicate with them, it's more likely that they're going to be doing that and not be frustrated. So here are some examples of active learning strategies. Um, so case studies, you can bring case studies to class and they can solve a case study that's related to your field. You can use concept mapping. So you can ask the student just to draw it out how a concept, relates to things onto the board or on a piece of paper. Think, pair, share. So this is a tried and true technique which we will be using today. So always introduce a concept, give the students time to think about the concept intentionally, give an intentional block of time for them to think about it, write down their thoughts, then they can chat with a colleague, and then they can share with a bigger group, and then hear feedback. So here's some additional options for active learning. You can do polling like I did at the beginning of the class. SMU does have access to Poll Everywhere. So if you just want to request an account, you can just send a message to the help desk and they can provide you with an account and you can create these polls. And it's always nice to give people, the students time to think about the topics that you just discussed. You can have a close reading with a visual analysis, so they can work in like by themselves or in groups to analyze a reading or an image or a video. You can have writing prompts, so writing response to a problem. They can diagram something. They can brainstorm or do a free write where you give them time to just really think, like write about a topic nonstop. And this should be a formative assessment type of technique that you're not going to be, putting a lot of high stakes grades on these activities. You just want the students to just practice things and just, it's just gauge how they're doing, but not high stakes. The other technique that for you to implement some of these active learning strategies, there's a technique that is called the pause procedure that I highly recommend that you guys consider using if you tend to lecture a lot. So the pause procedure is when you're breaking down that lecture. So imagine that you have a 15-minute session, or in the case of that, graphic about, or the graph about the lecture that was 80 minutes. Instead of lecturing the whole time, you can intentionally think about your lecture or break your lecture into smaller chunks. It could be 10 to 15-minute chunks. And then you can incorporate one of these techniques after you lecture for 10 to 15 minutes. So have a lecture on a particular topic and then implement one of these activities related to what you just talked about, and for the students to be able to chew in the information and process the information that you just talked about. So that can be really effective, but it requires planning. So we're going to try. So we're going to do a think, pair, share activity. So for the folks online, you will be your own group. So I'll give you a little bit of time for you to think about independently, and then you can chat with one another. And you guys here in person are going to be your own group. So I would like for you to think about a skill or concept that you could teach incorporating active learning instead of just lecturing. So what activity you think could be best, and what do you the challenges that you kind of foresee on doing something like this. So I will give you 3 minutes to think about this. If you want to write it down on a piece of paper, you can. And then after the 3 minutes, you will be discussing with your partner, and I will give you 2 minutes to discuss with your partner, and then we will have a bigger discussion with a bigger group. So go ahead. I'll give you 3 minutes. Tip: if you present with Canva online, if you just press the number on your keyboard, it creates a little timer on your presentation. So that could be really nice if you're presenting. If you present with PowerPoint, there are ways for you to embed a timer in your PowerPoint so the students see how much time they have left on the screen. Also, an inclusive teaching technique is that if you are giving an activity that the students are doing something, is to have kind of what they're doing on the screen, so that if they kind of forget what they need to be doing on the task, they can kind of refer back to what they need to do. Okay, so now you're gonna buddy up with your buddies, and you're going to just share with your buddy what you have thought about and the skills and concepts that you could teach incorporating some of these techniques. So I'll give you 2 minutes to do that, and then we'll have a bigger discussion with the group. So our timer went off. Do you guys mind sharing a little bit of what you guys talked about? Here, I'll give you the mic. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, so I teach the honors writing courses, and one thing we're going to start tomorrow actually is some activity on developing a very concrete, focused thesis statement for the next coming essay. And one tool I've been using for that is called thesis ladder of abstraction, where students can visually gauge where their concepts fall. If it's too abstract, usually that's just too vague and just unfocused. And so to be able to break down those concepts into something more concrete is the goal of that. And so they'll have this visual tool that they can fill in either with partners or just individually. And yeah, so hopefully that'd be engaging.
Sure.
I have an immigrant cinema course that I teach, and in that course, we often do readings about irregular immigrants, so people without an authorized status in the country. And the reading usually is fairly dry, but also very interesting because it's very controversial to a lot of people. And what I'm trying to get my students is to think of themselves in the shoes of somebody else. And I've devised an activity where, along with ChatGPT, I've coded um, an app. It's a Python app that I've given a bunch of categories that the person can be, and I call it the dice of life. And they push a button, and it tells you who you are. When you were born in any random part of the world, what kind of wealth your parents have, what kind of situation you're in as
Like a scenario
health-wise.
creator kind of thing.
Exactly. And it gives you an identity that is obviously not who you are now. And then we discuss that reading in light of who you are. And I take stances on the reading based on their, I don't know, socioeconomic status. And that way we're getting much more interesting discussions.
Yeah, for sure. So like you're really living it, right? Through it with a different lens. And I love that there is a tool that you can kind of break down and visualize your thesis too. Any comments from the folks online? Let me know if you have any comments and I'll unmute you. If not, we'll just move on to the next one. Perhaps. So do we have time? So the other option, I guess we'll just go, a little faster because I do have a hands-on kind of polling thing that we can do another question that I want to ask you guys at the end. But the other example will be the free writing activity. Oh, okay. Let's see here. Oh, do you want to share with a bigger group? I will unmute you if that's okay. Yeah. Oh, let me see here. Okie dokie. Let me see. Okay, I will get the sound going. Okay. Let's try. Say something so let's see if I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Okay. I will join the audio.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so what we were talking about, Ian was talking about how that as a drawing and painting instructor, he already by the nature of the subjects uses many of these techniques, which is great. I was talking about, so I like active learning, but it takes a lot of time. And if I have a 50-minute lecture, I just did this last week. I tried to do a think, pair, share, and it took like half an hour. And so I was left trying to squeeze all of the content that I wanted to get across into just 20 minutes. And we ended up going, not getting to everything and pushing it to the next lecture. And it gets kind of frustrating. And I was also just noticing, right? You, Addie, just said, oh, we're running out of time. And maybe I'm going to skip to the next thing, right? Like, like this is a problem with the active learning is that when people are really talking and sharing, it's hard to corral them into a schedule, especially if you only have 50 minutes. So what do we do with that?
So I have a couple of suggestions to maybe myself. So my primary thing was more, do we have, like, we do have the time, right? It's 11:30. So we have it till 11:50. Hold on, let's see here. There you go. Is it better, the audio, Stephanie? Let me know.
Yes.
So one of the things that you could do to make sure that you have the time to cover everything that you can is perhaps this strategy might not be relevant, or these strategies might not be available for every single class period that you have. I think that my recommendation is to start looking at the topics that you teach and see if any of them would make sense to incorporate some of these strategies. And if you don't have the time to cover some of the stuff that you cover in a lecturing class, you can plan on doing the flip model of instruction. So maybe for that class that you're planning on having these think, pair, share activities or active learning strategies, perhaps you can record yourself doing a lecture and provide for the students in Canvas. And they would watch that lecture ahead of time or before or after class, and you will still have the ability to kind of communicate the theories or the concepts that you need to communicate with them, but just not in the class. So, but if it is something that it would make sense to have a discussion, or you think that would help with students learning to implement some of these techniques and do it in class and to be able to gauge where they are, I think it makes sense to have them in class and just plan to have them in class. And if you can't cover those topics, guide them to resources. So you don't have to record things yourself. You can also curate some resources, like try not to reinvent the wheel. So if there are other lectures online or there are other resources about the topics that you have to teach and you don't have the time to cover, if the discussion has been so good and fruitful that you want to allow the students to have the time to go deeper and have those conversations, if you have some kind of backup resources that you can provide them and say, hey, we are also going to cover this and this today, but the discussion was great in class. If you go to Canvas, there will be a couple of articles there. This is something that we'll be covering our exam. This is something that I want you to, do and know. So just guide them to those resources and they can go and access them after class and not having to rearrange all of your schedule because of it, but just plan and identify the concepts that will make more sense to do something like this and just prioritize and have resources available in case you can't cover other things in class. And hopefully this makes sense and is helpful. So the free write is very simple, right? It's just use either a piece of paper or you type out on your laptop within a few minutes something about the topic that is posed in class. So in this class, we should have a little bit of time. So I'll give you like 2 minutes and I want you to free write about how you explain the value of active learning to your students. And if you haven't done, if you only lectured in class and you try to introduce something like this to them, it would be nice to kind of communicate at the start of the class, or if you want to start a semester and implement some of these active learning strategies in class, you can put it as a syllabus statement or something. So I will give you 2 minutes to kind of draft out how you would explain to the students the value of active learning. So another tip is that I love music, right? It's like I love connecting with my students through music. So one of the practices that I do when I teach is every day as the students are arriving, have music playing. And usually the first few people that come in, I ask, like, what have you been listening to? So like I usually put, an artist that they've been listening to and you can talk about it. So whenever you're doing active learning strategies and you do have a timer going, if the speakers in the class were working, it probably would have some music and, it can get the students kind of to share the artists that they've been listening to and you can have that going in really low volume in the background. And it's another way to kind of connect with them when it's not related to class topics. So do you mind sharing with us some of the things that you drew down or wrote down? Do you mind giving the microphone? Thank you. There you go.
Yeah. Basically, I wrote students will actively engage in, I specified the activity that I'm working on, the thesis writing. Active learning is an important skill because students will feel a sense of accountability and ownership during class. Successful classrooms are a collaborative space.
Yeah.
So it's just not me in charge. I want them to participate and create a learning environment that they have stakes in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. Anyone else online wants to share? You can paste it. If you've typed it up, you can paste it on the chat too, and I can read out loud. If not, we can go to the next one. So I will advance my poll to the second question. So, which will help me actually, let's do the polling at the end. I'll do the polling at the end because I want to see if you're grasping the concept of active learning. So these are some things that you should consider. Get the number out. Oh, never mind. So active learning should support your course goals for sure. So you need to look at what your intent is for the class and for the particular session that you're having and see if those align, if they make sense. So as I was chatting with Stephanie about, right, different kinds of activities take different lengths of time. So you need to budget that as you're planning the lecture. Different students might have different kind of baselines of knowledge. So sometimes like you might need to provide extra resources for the ones that are not on the same level of knowledge to participate, fully on an activity. I think that be able to kind of get the participation from the students when they're sharing with you their thoughts allows you an opportunity to provide prompt feedback, which is very, very important and something that's really helpful for learning to have prompt feedback. And you can show that there is a return on investment. Like we know from the research and learning that active learning helps you retain the information longer and it's better for your learning. So I think that there is more of an investment from the students to know that like this is can have you get a good return on investment on their education to be doing these things in class. So just, as you consider active learning, you know that you need to set the expectations and communicate those things to students. You will be interacting with the students as they're engaging on the activities. So, you want to be able to get them to share back what they do with you. Even with the free write, one of the things that I've done before is that you can have them free write on a piece of paper and they can turn it into you. Like I said, you might not have a grade attached to it, but you can gauge how well they are grasping the concepts of the class. And if you can reward the participation, that's wonderful. I usually have a participation professionalism grade in my class that, all these in-class activities that you do I'm kind of assessing how they're participating and how well they're engaging. So if there is that, there is a grade attached to it in some capacity, I think it will encourage the students to participate in these activities and be engaged fully. So for knowledge retention, we know the studies show that they do retain more information if they do active learning strategies. So consider that. And they apply the things that they're learning. So, and there is they're implement and ends up being better for the summative assessment that they have at the end of the course. So as we know, formative assessments are great because you're gauging students' knowledge throughout the course. You can provide feedback, but ultimately this also helps with those summative assessments because you are providing them with feedback. They give them opportunity to practice these things, engage with the content. So it's ultimately great. Do we have any questions about this? Yes.
Do games fit in?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So if you just do I just highlighted a few strategies that have active learning here. There's a lot of resources online. So simple Google search from like active learning strategies. I think that the Cornell Center for Teaching has a good list of activities that you can go in. I encourage you guys to peruse through that and see each of these techniques and like what does make sense for the topics that you teach and the discipline that you teach. One active learning strategy that I used to do a lot, particularly when I had to cover a lot of stuff, is the jigsaw technique. And basically it really encourages peer teaching a lot. And it is a completely different dynamic in class, right? Because I'm not going to be in front telling you this is what the article talks about. So in fact, I'm really reshaping the whole thing with a jigsaw. You're going to separate like the topic I'm talking about 4 different things, and we'll have one group that will learn let's imagine this. There's a topic. I divided in 4 different parts. One group is going to focus only on part 1, and they're going to learn how to present the information on part 1. So they're working together as a group to learn part 1 and learn how to present part 1. Then later in class, I'm going to mix groups. So a group will have a person from group 1 to part 1, 2, 3, and 4. So then they have to teach each other the part that they learn. And then at the end, there's an assessment. So they are learning themselves to teach each other. So I'm not doing any teaching in class technically, right? Like what I've done is I've designed this activity in class so that they learn from one another and they teach one another. It is a shift. Some students don't like that. Some students prefer coming to class and just being in the class. And as you're talking, they're taking notes. So that's why it's really important to communicate to students that like we're going to be doing things a little differently. And you have to be engaged. So it's not something that you can just zone out and look forward and just the soul is flying away from your body as you're sitting in class. The soul has to be present. The cognition has to be present. You have to be engaged. So some people don't like that, So I'm gonna go to the next poll. So if you go back to your mobile devices, um, go, I just want to double check now. To you, what is active learning now that you have been through this presentation? Respond to me, what is active learning? Oh no. Are you not able to get to the poll either? Or you are? Okay, so the other option is if you go to poll, oh, I'll just place it here. Go to this address that I'm sharing here onto the chat online. And then you're going to, oh, there you go. Yeah.
I typed in a sentence and then it just randomly.
Yeah, that's the point. It's going to be a word cloud. So do you know what a word cloud is? One of these poll things? Yeah. So basically it's going to get the words that I use the most and we'll highlight them bigger. So it's just going to, as people submit their answers, it's going to change the words. Yes. So there you go. As people are doing, there you go. So you see a lot of words there. Let's see. Active learning is big. Students present, facilitator, encouraging, deeply between, collaborate. Okay, there's a lot of concepts there or words that relate to what we talked about. It's something. There you go. Students are, look, I can read this as students are active learning in the process, which is a good interpretation. Yeah. What? Yeah, there's soul. That's great. There's soul in it. That's wonderful. That's great. Well, this was, I wanted to do this pull at the very end just because, you know, you'll be able to kind of identify some of the basic things about what active learning is. So I can kind of gauge that you're there. But the point is communicate with your students that you're going to be doing these things because these strategies can be much different to what they're used to, particularly if they've just been in lectures through high school or their other classes. Show to them that there is enough evidence to support that is a better teaching technique, that they will learn more and retain the information longer. They will engage with the concepts deeper. Uh, but you do have to budget a time in class. You can provide resources for the students to access outside of class in case you can't cover it. If you feel like, you know, there's a little bit of time management you need to worry about, just have some backup resources for the students to access. Or if you feel like the discussion is good and you want to continue that in class, you know, sometimes that happens. So that's a good thing. So just provide those resources. But ultimately, you can find more of these techniques online. So just peruse through and see what makes sense for the disciplines that you teach. Well, thank you. If you have any questions or if you want assistance incorporating any active learning technique, you can get in touch with us at the CTE. Just email us at ct@smu.edu and we'll be happy to sit down with you one-on-one and look at the class that you're teaching and the concepts that you're teaching. And let's plan out, you know, a session or a lesson that you can kind of start incorporating some of these and then see how that works. You can get feedback from the students and we'll go from there. But thank you for stopping by today. Bye.